Have you ever met someone who can recall, in vivid detail, something hurtful that happened to them 20, 30, even 40 years ago? They can tell you exactly what was said, who said it, the time of day it happened, and how it made them feel. And even now, just mentioning that person's name makes their jaw tighten and their voice drop an octave. These are the grudge holders. They don't just remember pain, they preserve it, polish it, and keep it on a shelf like a trophy they refuse to let anyone else touch. Most of us have held a grudge at some point. Maybe it lasted a week, maybe a month. But for some people, grudges become a way of life. They're not just emotions, they're identity. So what separates the person who lets go from the person who clings to resentment like a life raft? Today we're diving deep into the psychology of people who hold grudges, why they do it, what it costs them, how their brains and personalities wire them for long-term bitterness, and whether it's ever truly possible to put the grudge down. Let's start with the most basic question. What exactly is a grudge? A grudge isn't just anger. Anger is hot and fast. A grudge is cold and slow. Psychologists define it as a persistent feeling of ill will or resentment resulting from a past insult, injury, or perceived wrong. It's anger that has been frozen in time. The event is over, the person may have moved on, apologized, or even died, but the grudge holder keeps the wound open on purpose. So why do some people do this while others heal and forget? The first major factor is something called ruminative cognition. People who hold grudges tend to be high in rumination, the repetitive, often involuntary replaying of negative events. When something bad happens, most brains eventually file the memory away. But for ruminators, the brain treats the offense like an unsolved puzzle. It keeps pulling the memory back up, examining it from every angle, asking, why did they do this to me? What did I do to deserve this? How could I have prevented it? Neuroscientists have found that rumination activates the same brain circuits involved in physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex and the amygdala light up in the exact same way whether you're thinking about someone who betrayed you 10 years ago or you just stubbed your toe. To the brain, emotional pain and physical pain are not that different. And just like you'd keep touching a bruise to see if it still hurts, grudge holders keep touching the emotional bruise. But rumination isn't just a habit, it often serves a psychological purpose. One of the most common hidden functions of a grudge is that it protects a fragile ego. Think about it. If someone hurts you and you forgive them, you have to accept a painful truth. You were vulnerable. You trusted the wrong person. You misjudged someone. You weren't as in control as you thought. That's hard for anyone to swallow. But if you hold a grudge, you get to rewrite the story. Now you're not the person who got hurt, you're the righteous victim. The other person becomes the villain, and you become morally superior. This is called self-righteous anger, and it's incredibly seductive. It gives the grudge holder a sense of power and moral clarity. I may have been wounded, but at least I'm not like them. The grudge becomes proof that you have standards, that you're discerning, that you don't let people walk all over you. There's even a term for this in psychology: moral identity maintenance. For some people, being the good guy who was wronged is central to how they see themselves. Letting go of the grudge would mean letting go of that identity. And that feels like losing a part of who they are. Another major driver of chronic grudges is something called betrayal sensitivity. Some people are wired, either by genetics, early childhood experiences, or both, to be especially sensitive to betrayal. If you grew up in an environment where trust was repeatedly broken, maybe a parent who made promises they never kept, or a sibling who constantly threw you under the bus, your brain learns that people cannot be trusted. You develop what psychologists call an anxious or avoidant attachment style, but with a twist. You may attach deeply, but you're always waiting for the knife in the back. When betrayal finally comes, even if it's relatively minor, your brain screams, "See, I knew it. People always do this." The grudge isn't just about the one person who hurt you. It's confirmation of a whole worldview, that the world is unsafe and people are fundamentally untrustworthy. This is why some people hold grudges that seem completely disproportionate to the offense. To you, it was a rude comment. To them, it was the final piece of evidence in a lifetime of being let down. Now let's talk about personality traits. Certain personalities are grudge magnets. The one that comes up most in research is narcissistic vulnerability. Note that I said vulnerability, not grandiosity. There are two types of narcissism: grandiose, the loud, boastful type, and vulnerable, the quiet, hypersensitive type. Vulnerable narcissists appear shy or self-effacing, but underneath they have an incredibly fragile sense of self. Any slight, real or imagined, is experienced as a devastating attack on their worth. Because their self-esteem is so unstable, they can't afford to let go of offenses. If they forgive, they have to admit that maybe they overreacted, or that they're not as special as they need to believe. So instead, they nurse the grudge. It becomes a way to say, "Look how badly I was treated. That proves how important I am. Only someone significant gets betrayed this dramatically." Another personality trait strongly linked to grudge holding is high neuroticism. People high in neuroticism experience negative emotions more intensely and for longer periods. Where someone low in neuroticism might feel hurt for a day and move on, a highly neurotic person can feel that same hurt for months or years. Their emotional thermostat is just set higher. There's also the perfectionist connection. Many grudge holders have perfectionistic tendencies, not just toward themselves, but toward others. They hold people to impossibly high standards. When someone inevitably falls short, it's not seen as human error. It's seen as a moral failing. And moral failings, in the perfectionist's mind, deserve punishment. Forgiveness feels like letting someone off the hook who doesn't deserve it. Now, one of the darkest truths about grudges is that they can become a source of secret pleasure. This sounds twisted, but bear with me. Psychologists have identified something called grudge satisfaction, or resentment reward. When you replay the offense in your mind, you often get to imagine revenge fantasies. You picture telling the person off. You imagine them realizing how wrong they were. You fantasize about them suffering the way you suffered. These fantasies trigger dopamine, the same reward chemical you get from eating chocolate or winning money. Over time, the grudge becomes addictive. The brain starts craving that little hit of righteous indignation. Letting go of the grudge would mean giving up that reward. And the brain doesn't like giving up rewards. This is why some people will say, "I'll forgive," when they apologize, but then when the apology comes, it's never good enough. Because deep down, it's not about the apology. It's about keeping the dopamine drip going. So what does all this chronic resentment actually do to a person? The physical effects are brutal. Study after study links unforgiveness to higher cortisol levels, elevated blood pressure, weakened immune function, and increased risk of heart disease. One famous study from Hope College found that when people merely imagined holding a grudge, their heart rate and blood pressure spiked as if they were in real conflict. Now imagine living in that state for years. Mentally, grudge holders pay an even heavier price. Resentment crowds out joy. It's hard to feel genuine happiness when part of your mental bandwidth is permanently devoted to monitoring old wounds. Relationships suffer too. Grudge holders often become punishing or passive-aggressive. They keep score. They bring up ancient history in every argument. Over time, people start avoiding them. And then the grudge holder feels even more justified. See? No one really cares about me. There's also something called grudge contagion. People who hold grudges tend to surround themselves with others who do the same. Misery loves company, but resentment especially loves company. Entire families can pass grudges down through generations. Cousins who don't speak because of something their grandmothers did in 1962. So is there any hope for the chronic grudge holder? Yes, but it's not easy. The first step is awareness. Most grudge holders don't realize how much their resentment is costing them. They think they're protecting themselves, but they're actually imprisoning themselves. The grudge feels like armor, but it's really a cage. The second step is challenging the story they've built around the offense. Every grudge has a narrative. They did this because they're a terrible person and I'm innocent. Therapy, especially cognitive behavioral therapy or schema therapy, can help unpack that story. Often, when you dig deep enough, you find that the grudge isn't really about the other person. It's about an old wound being triggered. The coworker who took credit for your idea isn't your father who never acknowledged your achievements. But to the grudge holder's brain, they might as well be. One powerful exercise researchers use is called perspective taking. You force yourself to imagine the offender's point of view, not to excuse them, but to humanize them. What pressures were they under? What insecurities were they acting from? This doesn't mean you have to forgive, but but it often reduces the emotional intensity. The person goes from being a cartoon villain to a flawed human being. Another tool is radical acceptance, the idea that some things are genuinely unfair and always will be. Fighting that reality keeps the grudge alive. Accepting it, paradoxically, creates space for healing. And finally, some people need to grieve. Grudges often mask unresolved grief. Grief for the relationship you thought you had, for the trust that was broken, for the version of the world you believed in. You have to let yourself feel that loss fully before you can let it go. There's a beautiful quote from the writer Anne Lamott: "Not forgiving is like drinking rat poison and waiting for the rat to die." Grudges don't hurt the other person, they hurt you. The person you hate might be out there living their best life, completely oblivious. Or they might be dead. Either way, they're not the one suffering. Letting go of a grudge isn't about being nice. It's not about being the bigger person. It's about refusing to let someone who hurt you once keep hurting you every day for the rest of your life. Some grudges are small and can be released with time and intention. Others are massive, betrayals so deep they reshape a person's entire worldview. For those, forgiveness might not be possible or even desirable. But even then, there's a difference between healthy boundaries and toxic resentment. You can protect yourself without poisoning yourself. In the end, the psychology of grudge holding reveals something profound about human nature. We are meaning-making creatures. When something painful happens, we don't just want it to stop, we want it to make sense. Grudges are what happen when the only sense we can make of the pain is that the other person is bad and must be punished forever. But there's another way to make sense of pain: growth. Every hurt carries a lesson, if we're willing to look for it. The coworker who betrayed you taught you who not to trust. The friend who abandoned you taught you the value of self-reliance. The parent who let you down taught you how to be better for your own children. Pain is inevitable. Grudges are optional. So the next time you feel that familiar burn of resentment rising in your chest, ask yourself one question: is carrying this making my life better, or is it just making the past heavier? The choice, as always, is yours.